So what I want to do when I start today is I'm going to repeat what I talked to Michelle about earlier today. It was 135, but we were talking about 136 anyway. And that is that when we get to this point in the semester, we have an awful lot of referenced files and connected pieces. It's basically, you can think of it like a web, where we have all these little bits that are scattered around that all come together to make your final project. When you first log into the remote desktop system, you have to be careful to get all of the stuff actually on the remote desktop. So make sure it's locally there and it's not trying to download files. And this is something with OneDrive where if it's not local, then it'll try to go get it, but sometimes it doesn't get all the pieces, or it'll load part of it, but not the materials, or there's issues. So when you first log in to the remote desktop system, I'm going to share my screen here. When you first log in, right, you're going to get the plain basic screen. And what you guys have always done is you've gone to your OneDrive, you click on OneDrive, and you choose to sign in. So that's perfect. That's what I want you to do. So go ahead and sign in. In the meantime, open up a basic Rhino file. So not one of your files, just open Rhino. Get a new, large object inches template, let it load. And this is, again, before I'm doing anything else, go to V-Ray, or excuse me, go to your render, change your current renderer to V-Ray. Then open up the V-Ray asset editor and make sure that all of your materials have downloaded. So you know how they're not there by default. But I'm not doing this in my file. I'm doing this in a brand new Rhino. So before I even open my file, before I touch my file in any way, I'm going to download those materials. When that's done, I can go ahead and close Rhino altogether. So the materials are there, they've loaded in on the machine. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my OneDrive folder, and I'm going to think about where are all the places that I've stored files that are related to my final project. So for me, I have a folder that contains my artist retreat, and everything I've worked on this semester is in the spring of 2022. So I'm going to right click on that folder and say, always keep on this device. And as soon as I do that, it's going to download everything in that folder to be locally on this machine. Whatever remote desktop machine it is, it's going to be on that machine at DVC. When it's done, you'll get a little green check mark. Then I want to think about any other place I might have stored information. So for me, I have materials that I've used that are part of my collection of materials, and they're in my resources folder. So I'm going to find my V-Ray folder in my resources folder, and I'm going to right click on that and say, always keep on this device. And it's going to download the data that is in my materials. It also, because of how I have it organized, is going to download all my HDRI files. So it's doing that plus all my materials, they're all there. I also have some blocks that I've saved in my Rhino folder. I'm going to right click on that and say, always keep on this device. So after I've gone through all of those, made sure that everything's locally there, I'm going to make sure that I fire up my caffeine application. So I have it right here under caffeine. I'm going to double click caffeine 64, and it's going to show up as that little coffee pot in the bottom by my clock. I'll click on that. Or excuse me, I'll right click on that. I'm going to show active for 8 hours. That gives me 8 hours to work without losing my computer. So all of that process takes some time. And I know it's annoying to have to go through and do it, but I want to make sure that everything's available locally on the machine where it's supposed to be before I open up my original files. The other thing that I'm going to confirm is I'm going to look at my OneDrive here, and I'm going to make sure, I got to move my Zoom window here, sorry. I'm going to make sure that it's finished syncing. So when I did this morning with Michelle, I did it live for her this morning. When I did it, I had like 6 or 7 gigs worth of stuff that it had to download. The good news is the DVC internet is really good. And so these machines were able to download it quickly. I think it maybe took 5 minutes. So I want to make sure that all of that is done before I go in and open my master site or my retreat base file or any of the other files that I've been working on. So they're all here, they're all ready, they're all downloaded, etc. Andy, in your particular case, I think we may just have to reload the retreat base file And we'll get to that and I'll walk you through it during check-ins today. But I do want to continue on with what we're doing going forward. So all that being said, I downloaded everything. I'm ready to go. I could start a rendering right now and work on this particular piece of my scene. Now, today, we're not actually doing a rendering. I'm going to walk you through the process of creating an elevation view. And so this is something that's important because if you spend a lot of time creating your 3D model, it's only natural to want to be able to use that 3D model to create the line drawings that give you good output. Why go back and draw an AutoCAD elevation of this view if I could instead just create it out of Rhino directly? So you have a good 3D model. How are we going to work to get this set up? Well, first off, we need to view this as if we're looking at it directly at the side that we want the elevation of. So for example, I could take an elevation, let me back out here. I could take an elevation of this side, which is particularly ugly. It's the ugly side of my building. I could take an elevation of this side, right there, of the building, which is not quite as bad. Or I could take an elevation of this side of the building. That would work. That's probably the most attractive part of my elevation. So when you're thinking about an elevation, I'm not going to ask you to do all 4 elevations. I'm asking you to pick one elevation, and that's it. So that makes life a little bit easier. So you're picking the elevation that's the best. So I'm going to use this one as my example. Now, some of you have buildings that are orthogonal to the grid. So they're already set up, they're on the XY axis. So you can use one of the preset views to help you get set up. So if I went to set view, for example, I could look at the left or right view or the front or back view to try to figure out which one looks good. Let me try the front view. And you may need to find that, let's do it in wireframe for right now. Okay, so this is looking at my building. So we need to use probably the right view. Let's go to set view. Let's try the right view. And that is backwards. So let's try the left view. And there we go. That's the view that I wanted to have. So I'm gonna use pan here to just move this over. So I'm getting in the center of my view, right about like that. Okay, so that's not bad. Now, if I switch my view into shaded mode, we'll see if I can see my building. So in this case, I can't see my building, and that's because the ground covers where the building is from my view. So we're going to have to solve that problem in just a second. So let's jump back into wireframe so we can look at this again. There's my view, and let's save this view. So instead of being the left view, I'm going to go down to set view, named views, and I'm going to rename this one. I'm going to save it as my I don't even know what orientation I'm in. We'll just call it elevation. If I can type, which I can't. Call it elevation. And I'll go ahead and say, okay. Now, I have my elevation view. And in this scenario, I'm going to start to, especially because part of the terrain is blocking my view, I need to kind of perform some edits on this. And I don't want to cause damage to my original rendering file. So I'm going to save it first. I'll go to File, Save. And then I'm going to go to File, Save As. And this is not as critical as when we cut the section. When we cut the section, we destroy the file. This one is kind of borderline, but I'm going to go ahead and save a new one, because this way, if I mess it up, I can always go back to my renders. So this is going to be master site, and we're going to say dash elevation. And we'll go ahead and click on Save. So I'm going to view this camera. So I'll go to set camera and then view camera, or excuse me, show camera. And I'll then be able to see it in one of my other views. So I currently have top, front, right side. I really need to look at it in perspective view. So let's go to set view here and go to perspective. There we go. And you can see that I have, let's see here. Let me zoom on this. There we go. You can see that the camera is set up and it's looking from the back over there in the hills toward my building. That's based on the orientation. So what I need to do is I need to slice off the part of the hill that's not letting me see my building. So this is where a split comes in. So I need a large plane, and I can turn off, for clarity, I'm going to turn off everything but the little piece of terrain that I'm working with. And let's create a vertical plane. So I'm going to come over here, we'll create a vertical plane. In this scenario, it's on axis, and I'll show you guys how to do it if it's not on axis. Oh, I thought I chose vertical plane. Try that again. Holding down Shift, it needs to be larger than. Oh, my C-plane's not right. So let's go back to set C-plane. Sorry, set C-plane, world top. There we go. Try this one more time. Larger than my terrain. That looks a little bit better. Let's select it. And we want to make sure that that fully intersects everything on my piece here. It doesn't quite look like it does. I'll use the gumball to nudge this down just a little bit. There we go. And then let's look at it in the top view. There it is in the top view. Let's move it over. And let's look at it right on my building here. Now remember, I need this to be just in front of my building because I'm looking at an elevation. So I want it right in front of my building, nice and close to it. And then once I have it, look at it, it's still intersecting everything. I'm going to use that as a split, but I only need to worry about splitting the ground here. So we'll type in split, and we will select this as our cutting object. And it's going to split the ground into two pieces, there and there. This piece, we just need to go ahead and hide it. So now, if we look at it in my elevation view, we could switch this into shaded mode. And we should see it without. Can I look at this backwards? No, that looks right. Oh, that's because this plane is here. Oops, sorry, I didn't delete my plane. Let's go ahead and hide that plane. There we go. Now we're seeing it. And actually, if we look at the split, I wasn't quite close enough to the building. So let's show it. And actually, no, I was close enough, but I didn't split that little surface right here. So we need to split that one. So let me take my line again. Sorry, take my surface. Right there, split with that surface. And then we can hide this piece as well. Surface, wrong one. Hide. And that gives us our elevation view. That's good. I can hide this piece as well because I don't need that one. And now we're seeing the elevation view, which is perfect. Let's go back to set view. Let's make sure I am in fact in my elevation view. I think I zoomed in a little bit on it. And there we go. Now we're seeing an elevation of my building. That's excellent. That's what we're after. So I had to do a little bit of work to kind of tweak the settings there so that I could see this in elevation view. And we see this, the side of the contour of the hillside and whatever. Now it's time to create a line drawing of this view. Now Rhino has a really cool command that's built into it that's called make 2D. And we're going to use this over the next several lectures. But what it does is it takes the 3D model and makes a two-dimensional line drawing of whatever the view looks like. So it could be a perspective view that you use as a make 2D, or it could be an elevation view like this one that we use as a make 2D. So in order to make that 2D though, we'd like to know the extents of this view. So I'm going to come down in here and I'm going to draw a rectangle based on this There we go. I'm going to use this one, 3-point rectangle. And I'm going to go from, let me turn on my point snap here. I'm going to use the camera controls to draw this rectangle. So there, and I'm going to come down to where I snap to that point. Oops, didn't snap to it. Try one more time here. I'm going to have to zoom in. Point, point. And I'm looking for that point right there. And so that creates a rectangle. And if we look in my elevation view, notice that rectangle is exactly a quarter of my overall view. So if I were to scale that up by 2, if I said scale, and I chose this corner as my point, and I typed in 2, that rectangle would be exactly the same size as my viewport. And that's what I want. So let's go back and make the elevation view the full size. There it is. And let's go ahead and do a make 2D command. It's curve from objects, make 2D. I thought it was. I may just have to type make 2D. I thought it was there. Well, even I'm wrong sometimes. Okay, so we're going to type in make 2D instead. Make 2D. Oops. Make 2D. There we go. It says select objects to draw. I'm going to type in all. That's selecting everything. And then I'll go ahead and press enter when I'm done, and it'll bring up a little dialog box. So I'm doing the elevation view. My projection is the view. I'm coming down here, object properties. Okay, a couple things we want to pay attention to. We may or may not want to maintain source layers. This is if you want to separate out individual components of the building. If you're really comfortable in Illustrator, sometimes checking that box is beneficial. Sometimes it's not. I'm not going to check it for right now, and then I'll come back and show you one where I do check it. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and export the hidden lines. That's good. We already have our viewport rectangle, though we could choose to export the viewport rectangle. I don't like this. The reason I draw the viewport manually is because I don't always feel like it gets it and captures it quite correctly. So, and the rest of this is all fine. Our new layer is going to be make 2D. So let's go ahead and say okay. And this is going to take a little bit. If you find that this is taking too long or it's crashing the computer, I should have saved it first. Turn off complicated objects. So turn off, for example, your couches or what have you. So it finished the make 2D command. It did it in 13 seconds. And what I need to do to see this is I need to double click to get out of elevation. And I'm now going to look in the top view. I'm going to type Z for zoom, followed by S for selected. And it's now going to give me an export. There it is right there. That is a line drawing of my building. It's also going to export a bunch of extra stuff. So you see these big lines here. I don't need any of that. So we could actually go in and use a trim command to get rid of the parts that go beyond this viewport rectangle. Like that. Oh, let's get rid of those two too. So this gives me a line drawing, and I'm going to deselect it for a second, a line drawing of my view. Exactly. So let's export this. So I'll select it. I'll go up to File, and I'll choose Export Selected. Now, when I do this, I'm not going to export a Rhino file this time. I'm actually going to export an Illustrator file. So I'm going to come down here and choose Adobe Illustrator. And then we're going to go, hold on a second. Let me go into my OneDrive folder. I have to choose where to save it. Let's go into my folder for today. And there we go. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder for elevation. There we go. And I'm going to double click on elevation. And you guys give me 1 second. I gotta do something really quick. All right, sorry about that. Back to it. Share. Okay, so here we go. So I want it to be an Adobe Illustrator file. I'm going to put it in my folder called elevation. And we can just call this elevation. And then under options here, we need to check a few things. So we don't want to be at full scale anymore. We're going to use a model scale of 48 inches to 1. So I'm going to type 48 inches to 1. There's a small probability that I'm backwards and this should be 1 to 48, but I'm pretty sure it's 48 inches to 1 inch. And we'll go ahead and say OK to our options, and then we'll go ahead and save this file. It presents those options one more time, and now we've exported it. These are available on the Make 2D layer right here. So let's go have a look in Illustrator. So let me minimize this. We'll open up Illustrator. Oops, sorry about that. I'm just seeing a. Yes, Brooke, the Make 2D shows up in the top view because it is flat. It made it flat. So if I were to look at it in the perspective view, actually, technically it would show up in the perspective view as well. Let me zoom selected. There it is, but you can see that it is just a flat drawing. So there's no three-dimensionality to it. And that's kind of the beauty of it, is that we took the 3D view and made it a flat drawing. So let's get Illustrator opened up here. Now, if you've never worked in Illustrator, you haven't taken my other classes, that's okay. We're just going to do some very minimal post-processing, and all you have to do is follow along with exactly what I'm doing. Okay. So Illustrator's open. So let's go ahead and open that file. I'm going to go to File and then Open. And hold on. I'm hoping it's one of these presets. There we go. Let's go into Elevation. And there it is. Let's go ahead and open it. It will ask me to convert it. That's normal. So give it a second. No, it didn't ask me. It's nice. Oh, it did it automatically. Perfect. So if I were to zoom out, so if I press Control minus, we'd see that there is my whole viewport. This is at 1/4 inch equals a foot. So I would like the piece of paper that represents Illustrator to match up with this viewport. So I could select everything and I can move it to be right there. But I really need it to be a little bit larger. So that's where something called the artboard comes in. So I need to open up the artboard tool right here. And I'm just going to expand that piece of paper to match up with my viewport, right like that. So now if I press Control-0 to zoom to fit, you can see that I do have a live line drawing that represents the elevation view. It's not the most attractive just yet, but we'll get to fixing it in a little bit. In the meantime, I want to jump back into Rhino. And I want to look back at my elevation view again. So this view right now, I could render this out in full color because I have all my settings previously. And I could use that as an underlay, for example, behind my elevation. Now that may or may not be a style that you're after, but we can also do a rendering where we override the materials and make everything just kind of a gray, which sometimes is a good strategy. So let's look at our options to do that. I'll go into my view right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Settings. And at the very bottom here, I have a material override setting. I'm going to turn that on. And my override color is set at gray right now. I could also choose a particular material. I could use a white porcelain or something if I wanted to. So I do want to make sure that my render output is set to match my viewport, which it is. And I would want my quality to ideally be a little bit higher, but we'll go ahead and do this for right now. And let's take a look. I may need to adjust the camera settings, the exposure value, but let's have a look at this. The good news is that this tends to render out pretty quickly. All right, so in this scenario, it's giving me the black and white, or excuse me, the nighttime version, because that was the last settings that I had. So let me stop this. Let me reload my daytime settings. So I'm going to go into my options here. I'm going to go into my folder, and I'm going to switch over to my day settings for the exterior. And I'm going to make sure that my sun is turned on. There we go. And then I'm going to come back down and re-enable that material override. So we'll turn that one on, and let's take another look. Now I have my day settings. It's not quite bright enough for me, so I'm going to stop that. And we're going to come back in here to my camera, and let me increase this value. So this, excuse me, I have to decrease this value. So let's go down to maybe 12, and we'll try it. Oh, definitely too bright. So let's stop that. And let me come back and let's do it at maybe 14. Might be 13.5. Yeah, it might be 13.5. And then we'll do another render. Yeah, and that's not too bad. This realistically is going to take a little bit of Photoshop work. I'm not quite sure why I'm missing a glass panel here, and or this one is reflecting in a funny way. But let's let this finish out. Well, while that's finishing, I'm going to jump back over into Illustrator and make a few edits. So if we look at our layers, we have a hidden set and a visible set. I'm going to take the hidden set and drag it below the visible set. Now, with this hidden set, I would like to select all the lines that are in the hidden set. And I can do that by clicking right next to this circle, right to the right of it. I can then select all of the lines that are hidden. Let's go over to properties, and I'm going to change a few things. First thing I'm going to change is the thickness of these lines. So we'll say that instead of 1 point, these are going to be 0.25. There we go. And my color, right next to it, the stroke color, I'm going to double click on that. And it's giving me so many good options here. I'm going to have to come over here and change it. Come on. There we go. And let's pick kind of a gray. So I'm going to come down here. And let's do, I'm going to type these in because it's easier to get the value. 0, 0, 0, and let's do 50% gray. And it's going to change the color of those lines. Okay, so their color has changed. They're all that color. And then I'm going to actually adjust them a little bit further. I'm going to click on the stroke here, and I'm going to change them into a dashed line. And my dashed line, I'm going to do a 2 point by 2 point. And again, all of this is written out. By the way, if you get lost, there's a link to the course website, and it walks through exactly what I'm doing right here. So if you get lost, you can come back and revisit those. So it looks like I did it at 4 point by 4 point. Let's change that just to match what I did on my handout here. Let's go 4. Let's change this one to 4. And I also had my thickness at 0.5 instead of 0.25. So we'll go there. Okay, so now when I click off, you'll see that a bunch of the lines that are inside my building have now become dashed lines. And they've kind of gone away, which can be a good benefit. Okay, so let's look at the ones that are the visible lines, these ones. Once again, I'll select all of them, like clicking the box next to the little circle here. We'll go to properties. We'll leave them at 1 point, though I could up them all to maybe 2 point or maybe 1.5. I want to make sure that they're all black. So I'm going to double click on my stroke color and choose black. Say, okay, now that they're all black, that's good. I like this better at 1.5. Yeah, I might come all the way back down to 1. Oh, come on. All right. So now when we look at them, you can start to see the elevation view showing up. Now it comes time to do some editing. And unfortunately, no matter how good our Rhino exports are, frequently we need to go in and make some corrections. So for example, this line right here should be like one of these solid lines. It shouldn't be dashed. So I'm going to go in and I can actually use the eyedropper tool here to just copy what one of the other lines looks like. So I'll click on the other line and it should copy it. Now, of course, it didn't, which is, it's always good when this stuff happens. Let's move it up onto its visible layer. And why did it not copy it? So pleasant. I must have picked the wrong one. Let me use my eyedropper again, and we'll try that line. There we go. I clicked the wrong line. Apologize. So that made this piece solid. We can also tell that this outermost piece should be solid. So I can again go back to my eyedropper and click on it, and I can make that solid. It looks like it's showing up as gray, so I'm going to move it onto the visible layer. So move it up there, and now it's showing up as black. So while it's not ideal to go through and manually make these adjustments, sometimes you have to do a little bit of adjusting. That's where, if we exported and maintain source layers, it would be easier to pick all of one object, all of the other kind of object, without having to manually go in. Let me show you that part if my rendering has finished, just so you can see what it looks like. It can be a little daunting. This is kind of the base level of what we're after. So let me jump back into Rhino. Let's see how our rendering did. All right, looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save this. It's still rendering, but it's good enough for our purposes right now. I don't need all of my channels. I just need my single channel. So let's go in here into elevation, and we'll say this is elevation background. Now I'm choosing to save a PNG because I don't need the sky saved. So go ahead and click on save. Now this file that I just created is okay, but it maybe needs a little bit of touch up, and that's where Photoshop comes in. So like I said, don't panic if you've never worked in any of these programs before, because it's not required as part of this class that you learn Photoshop or work with Photoshop. It's just something that if you have skills in those, it can make this turn out a little bit better and a little bit cleaner later on. So let's open that one up and take a look at what we have. So let's go into our folder, and there it is. I'm going to open this in Photoshop. So let me choose open with, and let's open up Photoshop. So while this is opening up, let's talk about what's actually required as part of the final. So what I want you to end up with as part of the final is a minimum of this. So you've taken your Make 2D, oops, sorry, that was a wrong command here. There we go. You've taken your Make 2D and you've made a line drawing out of it. It would be great if you spent a little time and kind of cleaned things up so that it looked a little bit better. There's some objects that need to be deleted. So like that diagonal line doesn't need to be there, nor does that diagonal line. Likewise, some of these long diagonals could probably go away. Some of these pieces down below that are leftovers, they could go away as well. So, a little bit of cleanup wouldn't hurt, but that's, kind of the bare minimum of what we're after. As I go forward, I'm going to kind of enhance this a little bit further. And as I enhance it a little bit further, I'll kind of show you the steps. And that's for people that are more comfortable in Photoshop, more comfortable in Illustrator, and your end results can be that much better. So here it is. And I'm going to do a little bit of collage work over the top of that. I'm going to do that using the clone stamp tool. And what the clone stamp tool allows me to do is it allows me to copy from one area. So I can hold down Alt and copy and kind of fill in pieces that are missing. So I can kind of fill in that part there. I'm going to make this a hard brush. So for those of you that took my 135 last semester, you're going to have to come back and remember this stuff. May hold down Alt and copy there. So yes, Naomi, to answer your question as I'm filling this in, is that the Photoshop and Illustrator kind of post-processing isn't a required component, but I wanted to show it to you because I think it can make a big difference in your overall scene as you start to create it. Brooke, your question, do we save the Rhino file as a PNG for Photoshop or did you save the PDF? I saved the rendering and I exported the line drawing, the Make 2D, I exported that as an Illustrator file. So I'm going to show you a couple other options as we go forward. And you'll see that over the next couple lectures that a lot of what I'm doing is I'm kind of dumping a bunch of different strategies on you because I want to cover how do you get good quality output from this stuff. Okay, so I've fixed that one. Let me press Control Plus to zoom in a little bit here. It wouldn't be bad for me to fix this window. So I could use my rectangular marquee here to copy this window. Press Control, oh, sorry, I have to use Windows commands instead of Mac commands. Control C, Control V, and I'll get a copy of it. Maybe. Where is it? There's my window copy. We can bring it over here to fix that piece. Likewise, I have a little problem with this piece. So once again, I could copy this. Control C. Oops. I have to be on this layer. Control C, Control V. And the reason that I'm showing you this stuff is because I want you to know that a little bit of skill in Photoshop can really make a difference. Oops, that was the wrong one. And make your life just a little bit easier. Right, that one's a little bit big, so I have to do some editing there. Anyway, we'll leave it for right now like that, just so that you don't have too much to handle. I can go back and fix that a little bit later. So I have this. I would like it to be purely black and white, so I can do that using an adjustment layer. So I'll go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer. We'll do a channel mixer. And let's convert this to black and white, just so I don't have that pinkish tone. Something about like this. And then we'll go ahead and save it. So I'll go to File and then Save. That saves that PNG. Actually, it's going to save, I have to save a PNG, sorry. File, Export, Export As. And we will export it as a PNG, preserving the transparency. And let's put it in my elevation folder. And we'll replace it. The advantage of this one is just that it's black and white instead. So let me jump back into Illustrator. There's my line drawing. Let's bring that piece in that I just created. Let me go to File and then Place. There's that background. We'll place it in. The advantage here is that all the sizes are going to match up. The resolutions might not match up, but the sizes are going to match up. So all I need to do is keep this in proportion and make it the same width here. And we'll drop this down. Oop. Apparently it's off a little bit. We're going to have to resize it. Let's make the height the same. Ah, that's because it's, sorry, my fault. Back it up. I didn't keep the proportions. So let me hold down Shift as I do this. Our proportions stay similar. And come on. why it's making me lose that. I don't know. All right, hold on, a little bit larger. Get it to right. There. Let's move this over. Like that. Now, I don't want this to be in front, so I'm going to right click on it and say arrange, send to back. That's going to the back, and the line drawing then shows up on top of the shading, which can be a nice view. Now, I'm not that happy with the rendered version, and so there are other options in Rhino when we do these exports. So let me jump back here into my version here, and we haven't really explored these ideas too much, but in my view right here, I can go into a few other styles. So like this Arctic style, for example, when I do it, will convert my view into this kind of nicely shaded export. So this might be a good strategy. It might be better than the rendering in V-Ray. And if it is, we can go down here and we can choose to capture, and you've done this before, capture to file. And we're going to use our elevation view here now. In our resolution here, we're going to change the overall size. So let's go ahead and let's go to custom. We're going to lock to viewport aspect ratio, and then we can up the quality here. So we can go to maybe 3000 pixels. So increased it, and we can go ahead and say okay. Now, these lines that are showing, I'm not overly happy with them. So let's see if we can edit those a little bit as well. So here's our first version of it. We'll call this Arctic background 1. Let's go into my tools. Maybe it's got to save its capture first. Let's go to my options. And under view here, we can go to display modes. We can look at Arctic, and this is where we can start to make adjustments. So let's see here. We can uncheck show tangent edges, seams. We can uncheck show curves, and suddenly our view is almost just entirely black and white. Let's sub geometry. Let's turn that one off. Let's see what else. Let's see. It's still showing a little bit of the fur, but I'm not sure that we can turn that one off. So it's pretty close. Oops. It didn't stick. One more time. Arctic. Oh, come on. Arctic. There we go. And let's uncheck these guys. All right, I'm going to say okay, not close it. That's where I screwed it up. And now we have another view of this. So we could go ahead and go to File, and then we could, Capture right here. We'll go to Capture, to File. Same thing here. We up the size. We'll say okay. And this is my background 2. And so this may end up being a better background than my previous one. It still probably could use a little bit of Photoshop work to kind of clean up some of those edges underneath. I could also do an offset to clean that up. We'll come back here in just a second. So I could, for example, go back into my perspective view here. Come on. Right, I could duplicate this edge. That edge right there, that edge right there, that edge right there. We could join those. I could copy that vertically. I could drop it down a bit. Then I could take that and this and loft those together. And when I do that, it should theoretically help the view. It's hidden a bunch of what was going on there. There's a little bit of a shadow that's being cast in there, but you know, we're getting the best we can. And so that might be yet a little bit better version of this without having to go into Photoshop. So let's jump back into Illustrator and let's collage that piece in this time. So if I didn't like this background, we could take it, we could delete it, and we could drop it in. Sometimes it's better to go ahead and create its own layer. Put it on layer 3 here. It's selected. We'll go to File and then Place. And I could do this background too. And we'll drop it right there. I'm going to have to zoom out, Control minus. I made that a little bit large. And let's shrink that down. I'm going to hold down Shift to keep it in proportion. That time it lined up perfectly. And then we can press Control 0, and you can see what this one looks like in elevation view. All right, so you can see that we're quickly trying to get a good quality elevation out of this with a little bit of rendered and textured background. That's ultimately the goal. So I'd be happy if I got to this phase. If you want to push it a little bit further, I talked about this, we can come back. I'm going to get rid of the current Make 2D. So actually, let's take this and select sublayer objects. And we'll go ahead and delete all of them. And I'm going to do another Make 2D this time. So let's go back to a wireframe view. I'll do Make 2D. I'm going to select all objects. And I'll go ahead and press Enter. And then here, I'm going to maintain source layers. And then I'll go ahead and say OK. And it will create another Make 2D. And I'm doing this just in contrast, so you can see the difference and why you might want to do it. All right, so let's look at it in the top view. There it is again. Looks the same, but the layer structure is different this time. I'm going to do a trim and get rid of the pieces that are just outside that I don't need. Perfect. I'll hit Enter to finish. And then I'm going to select just this. And I'm going to export this. So I'll go to File and then Export Selected. And we'll call this Elevation 2. Just so we can maintain the options. The options here should be the same. So preserve model scale 48:1. That ends up being 1/4 inch per foot, by the way. Okay, now that that's exported. Did it not export? It didn't quite get everything. I'm missing a few pieces there. That's because they're selected. Let's ungroup them. See if we can get them. Yeah, there we go. All right, one more export here. So I'll select these. File, Export Selected. Elevation 2, we'll save it. Yes, we'll replace it. 48:1, we'll go ahead and say OK. And now, if we go back into Illustrator, we can open up that next one. So I'll go to File and then Open. We're going to open up Elevation 2. Let me press Control minus to zoom out a bit. And we can work through the same stuff that we did last time. We'll select everything and we're going to move it to the corner of our artboard. Alternatively, we could move our artboard to the drawing, either way. Then I'll click on the artboard tool and I'm going to expand that artboard to match up with my overall viewport, like that. And now there's a big difference. And that big difference is, look at how many layers are here versus the 2 layers that I had in this view. So the advantage, while it's a little bit more daunting, is that I have control over everything that's been separated out by different layers. So the first thing that I would do is I would go through and I would select all of the visible layers and put them together. So let's create a new layer, and I'm going to call this one visible. Then I would take everything that has a visible, oops, let's hold down control. Sorry, I forget that I'm on Windows. All right, well, I'm going to have to do them individually, and I'm going to drop those onto this layer up at the top that says visible. So keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Visible. So bear with me. I know we're almost out of time, but all right. So what I have is I have a layer with all the visible on it, and then all the rest of this is hidden, assuming I didn't miss any. It looks like they're correct. So I can create a layer for hidden. I have to rename it. And then I can take all of these, that part's easy, and put them on the hidden layer. So this is very similar now to what I had in the last class, where I have two layers with hidden and visible. The difference is that I can select these based on different pieces of the puzzle. So I can take, for example, these are windows, and I can edit the line weights on those windows. This is the topography lines. So that one might be worth darkening up. These are more windows. So I can start to organize these based on content and then fine tune them rather than just assuming, right, that everything needs to be one layer. So these, for example, are all the posts. So it just gives me finer control as I start to create this line drawing. It's not required that you do it. This is obviously a much more in-depth strategy, but I wanted to point it out for those of you that are more comfortable, because you can get significantly better results with a little bit finer control if you export maintaining the source layers on it. So I'm just going to turn these on just so you can see them in contrast. That's a 2. Oh, no, we did a 4 and a 4. You're right. And so now the hidden layers should all be dashed. There we go. And we're starting to see it. Let me press Control Plus a couple times to zoom in. And you can see that I have similar issues. I have lines that weren't assigned correctly, but it's easier to find them and then work with them. So there they are. Let's select all of those ones that were purple. They should have been black, so we can go through and we can change them over into black, etc. So it's just a little bit easier of kind of way of working through it. So ultimately, we're after something that looks a lot like this. If you have more time to kind of clean it up, that would be better. I have versions that I've spent more time cleaning up, so I can post one of those as an example. But it's a quick and easy way of getting a nice rendering out without too much work. Certainly, it's better than trying to draw it by hand after the fact. And using that little bit of collage can give you just a little bit of depth and a little bit of shadowing, which increases the look of the view. So as you guys are probably aware, and I am going to let you go momentarily, this is kind of the second to last week of instruction for this class. So we're going to work on elevations, then we'll work on plans, and then we'll work on our sections, line drawing sections. Those are the last 3. You're going to be picking 2 of those 3 to turn in as part of your assignment 205. Remember that everything is coming up and being due on Monday the 16th. That's when we're trying to have everything due. As I said to my morning class, if you have a bunch of finals on the 16th, because everybody's doing it on the 16th, send me an email and we can make arrangements to have that a little bit later on in the week so that you can turn things in a little bit later. But I'm expecting an email, not just assuming that I'll accept it later. So I need advance notice that you need to shift the schedule around a little bit. Other than that, everything should be done on that Monday, which gives you the rest of the week to concentrate on your other classes. That's my goal there for you. Okay, so there's a lot to do in the last week. I also know that there are lots of problems that arise with V-Ray and Rhino and what have you. That's what the check-ins are for. So come today. If you have issues, we'll try to get through all of those issues. If you have a check-in that's normally scheduled today, but you don't have any issues and you want to come on Wednesday instead because you have issues, that's great. If you had issues today and you need to come back on Wednesday because you have further issues, that's also okay. So you're welcome at any one of the check-ins or all of the check-ins coming forward, because I know there's a lot of issues that kind of tend to rear their heads at this point in the semester. So any questions you have, I'll do my very best to get you solved and pointing in the right direction. All right. So at that point, I'll go ahead and let you guys go, and I'll see my first group in about 5 minutes.